to episode 64 of the Critical Fools podcast. This week we'll be discussing and reviewing the 2022 film. It's kind of weird because we just turned the new year.
Mhm.
Northman by directed by Robert Eggers. It's I think I don't know. It's a film that's hard to actually explain because of its style and story. I would say it's like a mythology type film.
Mhm.
That's the way I would categorize it. I think most people put it in the you know epic fantasy genre.
Mhm.
Like Norse, like you would say maybe Lord of the Rings or something. But yeah, I'll leave it there. I guess this movie's a bit intense and also a bit let's say interesting in some of its plot points. I'm curious, like on the whole, when you saw the start of the film, like what were your first impressions or your vibes, as they would quote unquote say?
I mean, it was a very dark film. Gives you a lot of very nihilistic undertones, right? Is centered around the Vikings, right? And so they have a lot of very brutalistic traditions within their culture, and they definitely went heavy on the emphasis for a lot of their brutal traditions, right? I don't know how many were true in the movie, or if some of them were true or not, but you don't think of Vikings and being the most peaceful, pleasant people in general, and so I think they went pretty heavy on a lot of the dark undertones. Even the way the film was shot, right? It was very dark, not a lot of color, right? Everything was just from the tone, just felt very kind of depressing. And this whole movie was just essentially like a hero's journey, if you will. And you didn't know quite where it was going, but you knew something bad was going to happen. Yeah, very quickly on, there's a coup where the main character's father gets killed, and the brother takes over, and then you find out other things along the way. But yeah, this really reminded me in many ways in terms of the style, in terms of some of the darkness and brutality. I don't know if you ever saw Apocalypto, but that's kind of what came to mind a bit.
I did see that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, to me, I guess the two topics of the film to talk about is its style, which I think is kind of unique, actually. Like I said, the grittiness, that's one thing, the lighting, but I think also like how even the action sequence, how they're shot, it's kind of like, it feels like, when I used to read Greek mythology, it almost like was shot in a way that I would visualize how, like these archetypical heroes would like, talk and act. Because even some of the dialogue is not. At times, I was like, this doesn't seem like how people would actually talk, even if they were real Vikings. This is like basically like a tale, like Gilgamesh or something. Like they talk like that.
Of course, yeah.
And then also the thing I really wanted to tackle after that, we talk about that, is the themes, which I like the themes in this film. This is definitely a film that it resonated with me, because I like the hero's journey, and like I was able to connect why I like this film so much versus The Whale, because this film represents like kind of like the archetypes I like, and The Whale triggered me I actually thought about your comment, like when you said like it's interesting the reaction you have to a film, so I meditated on that, and I was like, you know what? It's because this guy is my anti-hero. No pun intended with the song, but like it's like it's crazy, like it is.
So what did you like? What did you like from this hero so much?
I want to get to the ending. I thought that was cool, but I think just like
sort of honor doing the right thing.
Even though he does not, I wouldn't say honor, because he does like some brutal stuff.
No, in terms of avenging the death of his father.
Yeah, but what I liked was like he is told often that like he'll have a choice to make.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think it's like either show kindness to your kin or vengeance, because one of the themes is vengeance here, right? And the toll it can take on you, and how it can blind you, which it does him for a lot of I would say, a portion of the film. And I think his outlet with Olga is like how he kind of sees like, oh, maybe I wish I had something different. And then we'll get to the ending. But I think like he doesn't shy, even though like there's a period where he shies away while he's growing up. He doesn't shy away from, he did make a promise. He does have to, set a right. Yeah, he has to set a right that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
He is tormented by this, because we'll get to that twisted mother stuff. But
yeah, that was wild.
I don't think he was, so even though so in his mind, right? So okay, we'll scroll back, right? His father gets killed, betrayed by his uncle. um, it is, implied that like he escapes by the skin of his teeth, and then he grows up in like more of a, I don't know how you would call it, like barbaric Viking culture, and then he learns how to fight and do stuff there.
Yeah, what was interesting is it's basically these like groups of outlaws in a way, as it seemed, of like Viking groups. And they just go and pillage and take over like different towns. It looked like it was within England, right? Although I could be totally wrong in terms of where it was in Europe, where he actually was. What was interesting is these groups. Is apparently they were just so entranced in sort of their brutality that literally the English, I believe, would call them berserkers. So the term berserk actually came from like these groups of Vikings that he was actually a part of. And so I found that fascinating because I was like, oh snap, that's where the English word comes from. Like,
that is fascinating. Yeah. They were berserkers. Yeah, well, they did act like berserkers when they raided that village. That was a cool scene too, but it was brutal. How they took care of everybody. But like, okay, so even though he's like he could live this comfortable quote unquote life as a berserker, he is still reminded through symbolism, which I found interesting with the raven and stuff, that he did make a promise to his father that like he would have, he would avenge him and honor him if something were to happen to him. And he's often asked early in the film by like Olga, even though like, why would you choose to come to this? Because it turns out that like his uncle who betrayed his dad for a kingdom ended up losing it like a moron. And you actually see that his kids are kind of moronic too. And that
like the one thing I want to circle back to the beginning, which I found kind of interesting, because we've talked about this before, but I find it very fascinating in the beginning when the king's jester, the main character's father's jester, he made a comment about the uncle and the king's wife and how she was kind of attracted to him, but making kind of crude jokes. And then he's like, "Shut up! Like, don't dis." And the uncle was like, "Don't disrespect the queen in that way." And he's like, "Dude," and the king's like, "It's just a gesture. Just leave him alone." But it was just interesting how he was able to pick up on sort of the dynamic that was going on in the truth. We all always talk about, oftentimes within like comedy or comedians are able to pick up on certain truths and sort of relay that in different ways. So I found that interesting that they brought it back with the jester in this.
Yeah, movie. and then how he becomes like a talking head. That was that was crazy. But yeah, it's kind of like hinted that like there's something going on, right? I think that was believable. We'll get to that scene where like I was just like, what am I watching? Like, what is
which scene?
On? The one where she's like making out with her son, but the
oh, you're talking about the
yeah, because like when even though he like he's like to your point, even though he's shocked that like basically his mom and his uncle are boning, I think you're right. Like the audience could get the little hints like, okay, I was not expecting the whole twisted angle that she was going with later when she was trying to like
well, what was crazy too was just what was revealed as to like, oftentimes you have this perception of someone that you really look up to, aka the main character and his view of his father, and then he finds out sort of the brutal realities of what actually happened, how his mom was actually a slave as well, right? And she was sort of forced upon him, basically, that he was conceived by rape, was sort of the implication. And I was like, whoa, this is getting very brutal very quickly. And then that kind of throws him for a loop. And,
it does.
He almost dies because of it.
Yeah, because like you said, he has his own trials. I mean, there's many trials and tribulations he faces. I do. Again, one aspect I liked about this character is that even though he's confronted with such dark terror, he doesn't forget that like that doesn't remember that whole adage like two wrongs don't make a right. So he, even though
he's in full retreat and become the whale.
Okay, I wouldn't go that far, but I would say more like he doesn't. Even though it makes an impact, and you could understand how in a normal situation that could really mess with your head, and it probably did with the main character, he still strays true to his mission. And I'm not saying his mission is that, I mean, his mission is basically to kill people. But
what you're saying is at least he stood for something.
Or like at least he was able to process that, like, even though that was an ill, that doesn't make him, even though the mother tried to project that, right? That you're evil and I want my other kid, Honestly, the mother character in this film was like beyond twisted. I was like, she was like the one character I was like, you know what? At the end, the uncle, I could kind of like sympathize. He lost his kids.
Well, I mean,
she was like the evil one.
Yeah, she went through a lot though too.
Yeah, but I mean, you don't do that to like, even if it's like a child you reject, like that's just you're going too
No,
far.
he was a child conceived by rape.
And then, yeah, well, then don't kiss him like
Oh,
like
yeah, well, no,
eagerly.
no. She was the reason why she did that was to manipulate him to kill him, and she was
Yeah.
going for his sword.
Yeah, well, that was never gonna work. That guy, I knew he was gonna start, dude. Because I would start stabbing my own freaking mother if that happened to
Of
me. I would freak
course.
out. I would be like, "This is
Well,
dumb."
she shocked him, and he didn't really know how to react, and so it was
Yeah,
because of that shock where she was trying to take advantage.
that was a failure. Good thing it failed. But anyways, rewinding back, yeah, I think early scenes with what did you think of that scene with the when they're underground with the shaman jester guy and they're doing the wolf
Which
stuff?
scene? Oh, you're talking
Uh,
about with William Dafoe's character?
yeah,
That was interesting. I mean, it's just some rituals that a lot of old cultures have to try to toughen up and like prepare to be a warrior to take over. I mean, I don't know how much you want me to go into it. I don't really know how true that is to actual Viking, practices in the lore, but yeah, I mean, it was what it was. It was weird. I mean, I'm not a Viking, so I can't speak to greater amounts of it.
yeah. I mean, I think the like you said, the technicalities are like probably embellished and they're probably like twisted. But what I was reminded with that scene is that often, whether that's in our society today or if you look at other ancient cultures, that like rituals are important for passing on like
Sure.
themes that like you want to cross generations. And I think that's something that has been forgotten in our modern culture a little bit. But like what I got out of that scene was kind of like, okay,
It
it
was a
is
kind of a
whatever.
passing of the torch in a way.
It was, yeah, it was kind of like passing the torch, but also like, if you're like you're gonna be the leader one day, and you need to understand like what that means in a sense. Because one thing I got out of that scene was kind of like the tear thing, right? Who like you'll
Yeah.
shed your last tear for
Well,
I
this will
forgot
be
what
the
the whole
last
line.
time. Yeah.
You shed a tear or something like that. Which, okay, people are gonna take like a whole like, oh, men should cry too, but I don't think that was the point of that scene. I think the point of that scene was more like, you transition in your life into different roles, and he was transitioning slowly, ideally slowly. I don't think the dad saw his father saw it coming that he was gonna get brutally killed by
If he saw it coming, that wouldn't have happened.
exactly. That scene was kind of like cool because like the arrow just came out of nowhere and he just started killing him and then chopped his
Yeah, I
head
was
off.
like, whoa.
Like that's a quick
There
ambush.
were there were a lot of beheadings in this movie.
Oh
Mostly
yeah,
other than
definitely. So anyway, so he does the berserker thing. He realizes that he can't escape his destiny. That's the big one too about like fate and destiny. I wanted to we could dig into that a little bit in a sec, but so he recognizes through another mythical shaman that like says to him that you can't escape your destiny, your fate, and then gives him the line of like you'll have to make a choice. But on that theme of destiny and fate, I guess in general, what's your philosophy on that? Because obviously it's an interesting conundrum of like you think you have choices, but then sometimes when you look back, you're like, did I really have choices? Like, are we talk a lot about cycles. We off the record we've talked about The Wire. Like if you're born in a situation, like how many choices do you really have? Like, it is
well,
interesting.
I think within the situation you're born, you do have choices. Within his situation, he had choices as well. He could have folded or not fallen through with what he was his perceived mission for vengeance, but he chose to go through with it. Despite all, I mean, prophecy and all these things, these are kind of like, these are ways of explaining the natural world or basically what people should do, I think, and act in a moral way. I think in their culture, vengeance, or how do I say this? Actually, like going through and trying to. I think with them, a lot of times is if you die in dishonor, then you're like, I don't know if they went into it, and I could be totally wrong. But if someone dies in a dishonorable way, then you're kind of stuck as a warrior, not being able to enter Valhalla, right, which is their version of heaven. And so a lot of times they'll seek vengeance for someone who murdered them in a dishonorable way to try to restore that honor so that their deceased loved one could enter Valhalla as a warrior. And so a lot of it tends to be like to try to restore honor in that way, which is why like destiny, all these things, those are sort of the human emotions or things that they really valued in their society, so they wanted to promote. Within the Western world, right, we don't have quite those views of like destiny or honor or destiny or fate in that way, because a lot of times like one of the big things is your idea of free will. But I think the whole point in that case is just do the for destiny is to do the action that is most honorable within their society. I don't know. I mean, I don't know exactly what you want me to do. I think there's destiny to a well, degree. No, you still have choices even in your. You can be in a screwed up situation, but you still have like if you want to talk about The Wire, right? You can, and you're in an Omar situation. You can, or rob drug dealers, or you can just work at the corner store if you really want. You still have a choice. Not that I'm going to judge you either way, but you get my point. Within your environment, within your screwed up circumstance, or your.
But let's take this even more meta.
Hold on, because we even went. I mean, we both went to like a more privileged high school. There's some people who took advantage of that. They came from good families, and we know some people that came from pretty good means who did not do very well and they flunked out.
That's true.
Right? You still have a choice. Anyway, go ahead with your more meta analysis.
No, I was gonna not more meta analysis. I was just like sometimes because I used to be in the camp that like you always had a choice, free will. But now as I become wiser in my elder years, I see that like some things are they kind of like they were destined to happen kind of sort of a way.
Like what? Like give me an example.
Like,
and I'm not saying that we definitely agree that being in a certain environment will lead to more likelihood of certain outcomes. I think we both agree with that, right? But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess it's just like little things, right? Like it's kind of like when I look at my own like family lineage, I go, okay, well, if this person didn't want to be an explorer in the 1800s, I wouldn't even exist. But he wanted to be explorer because he was fascinated with, it's just like it seems like this. Unless everything is random and things just happen, it's also like the conundrum, right? It's everything random and events just happen, and why do we fight for order then? Or is there some kind of like natural like movement towards something? Like when I think of, let's say if you do believe let's say you are someone who subscribes to the Big Bang Theory, right? So like you have to assume first people just say, okay, just start from one initial burst of atoms, but then you ask yourself what caused that initial burst of atoms, and then
you're going with the first move or philosophical thought. This is back to Bauman's class.
And then everything moves, right? Like I'm not even saying anything about the God thing. I'm just saying that everybody starts with the initial direction of movement. Even at the atomic level, like you were set on a course. We just don't know where that ends. I think about these problems often, and I'm like, oh, it's so intriguing.
Is it though?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I love these little conundrums. Like it's just like the.
No, you're saying you're on a predestined course. Yes and no, I would say.
I also like this other analogy that comes from my last point about Christian. It's like a Christian.
Yeah, and I'll bring it back in a second to a point that might trigger you. But go ahead.
I can't remember who said this, but it was like it comes from some theologian. This is like I think somebody asks him like, why don't we understand God's plan? This seems like there's so much meaningless suffering, and he tells them basically that God's plan is. You have to think of it more like a tapestry. This had to have been Middle Ages because, like, I don't know who says tapestry anymore. And he says you have to think about it as a tapestry where, like, you're only one little speck of this tapestry, and you don't know how the whole thing plays a part. And like, you have to just do the best you can and trust in the Word of God, and like you have to just have faith. He says a lot of faith. And
it's always been the Catholic way. It's like that, or like, well, why do we do it this way? Well, it's church tradition. Right, I've heard that. Yeah,
tradition, but beyond the tradition, he wasn't even telling about like go to mass or anything. He was just saying you have to have faith that like the things that happen that are bad that happen to you or others, that they mean something, because in the grand scheme of this tapestry, You have to have faith. I mean, I found this interesting. I found this like little
I
interesting.
do, but I tend to very much disagree with that kind of analysis. I
It
think
just
he made look, if there is God, I think he would make us, and he allows us to either to do what we do to try to understand and live in a right way or not. I don't think it's part of his plan for a lot of the suffering that happened in this world. I don't think so. I think he just gave people the choice to do and try to make things work and try to live in the most in the best way that they can. And oftentimes humans don't.
Yeah, and then when I look at, so that's like the religious angle, and then there was
Yeah.
a book I read years ago that really left an impression on me. It's called like by Bill Bryson. It's called I do highly recommend this book to people. I think it's Bill Bryson. Is it is it that a short? Yeah, a short story of nearly everything. And that book really talks about like when you really break it down, the odds that this planet exists, that we exist, is so minuscule that even he's an atheist. He's like, you have to start even pondering the question that there is. He doesn't say God, but because he's an atheist, but he says like some kind of flowing
Some
force out,
energy.
some flowing force out there, and that's what I mean by the conundrum. And I bring it back to the film is that like, you know, like you said, I think for the longest time our species had a hard time explaining the natural world or explaining things. But what I've always found interesting, and even Carl Sagan used to say this often, is that like, and he was atheist. That's what I like about atheists is that the true intellectually honest ones have interesting takes. Even they're like, yeah, like
There's
I don't
a
believe
lot that are
I don't believe in your your Christian God, but I find it weird. Like he even says, I'll quote him. He's like, I find it weird that like I visit India and I visit South America, who technically should not have really had any cross pollination, and they're the same archetypes, like of heroes with some variations, but you can find the same
I think
mythology.
it's just something that's
there.
deep within the human psyche. To your
Oh,
point,
so is that destiny there?
no, it's just things that kind of naturally arise that people note.
Anyways, what's your point?
Oh, no, hold on. So, because you went way on left field with a lot of this. So I'm going to say my point. And so I am about 2.5 hours into actually Height's book, Righteous Mind, which you have talked about for years. Great book.
That's my favorite book.
Great book so far, I must say. Fascinating, really, in the way of like some of his analyses. Talking about, because I know you're going to Brazil soon, so he was talking about his study with Porto Alegre and Recife. It was very interesting. But it was interesting, and he gives a lot of credit to like a lot of religious text or religious order in terms of how it sort of structured society and our views in, because his whole thing, right, was about moral psychology. And so he it was very interesting reading some of his, and like you're talking about like the intellectual dishonesty of like certain atheists. That's how, you can kind of name out certain, but like, yeah, like Sam Harris, I view him as very dishonest in many ways with certain things, because he can't. It's very easy to point out the shortcomings of religion, right? But where he sees it as like the verbatim truth, but you kind of have to think of it as story sometime, and like how I've often thought about like the Bible, right? Because there's some more like other religious texts. Is it's kind of like a total collection of all the wisdom of the ancient peoples just distilled down into stories, right? It's kind of like the early Peterson-esque version. But when you read the stories, it's like, there's a lot of like deep shit there in terms of how you should behave or how you should act. And I think that was just a culmination of all of people's interactions and kind of understandings of like how you should best act as an individual that will lead to kind of a better societal outcome as well, right? And even the whole point of Haidt was saying that he's like, it was very interesting when he was like doing his initial work on moral psychology. He's like, when you hear about a lot of rules that people put in place, it's not necessarily as a way to explain the universe, but it's more important in terms of creating a functional, like ordered society. I was like, and that's very true. Otherwise, you kind of have chaos. But sorry, I went on a tangent with all that. But it's just because I've been listening to Haidt lately.
No, I mean, it is true, and that's why like
that's why I don't like hearing Harris. He's like, you think there's just this guy that's like up in the sky just looking down on you, and he gives like no credence to religion whatsoever. And when I always heard that, or like his arguments, I was like, Yeah, okay, I could see kind of where you're coming, but it's so superficial. It's just like, well, the question Harris should ask too, if he's being like honest, is would we get to this point in society and human development without religion? And I am more on the camp that we wouldn't, because people throughout history have been very tribal, right? There's been wars fought over different ethnicities. They still do it to this day. I'm not going to act like it doesn't. But the one thing that kind of found some commonalities amongst the divisions of ethnicity was religion, right? That kind of united people and I think led to a lot of development. Also led to a lot of chaos, but I don't think we
Yeah.
would get to this point in human development without religion.
Yeah, before we bring it back to the film, I'll just say like I always go back to a quote that I like from Voltaire, who is another guy that wasn't really, he was more in the Sam Harris camp, but unlike Sam Harris, he was actually smarter than him. He said it
Sam
best.
Harris
He
is
said, like,
just he's just too superficial for me, man. I've
yeah,
read some of his works.
but Voltaire said it best. He said, like, you know, as he studied, you know, French society and Europe, he said, like, if God didn't exist, we would have to invent him. So it's like he basically conceded that like you can make fun of, like, you know, the angels, whatever, but there is a like, to your point, there's a purpose to it. It's not, don't be so dismissive.
Yeah, it was Heights' observation was just so fascinating. I was like, it's very true. The more that, you know, through his moral psychology studies, the more he was really learning about how sort of morality is developed across cultures.
Yeah, it's the Power Myth, a great book too that you should read one day.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Okay, Joseph Campbell.
I love that guy. Anyways, the going back to the film. So, I mean, the quick look. The reason we're not like going too deep on the plot lines is because, look, I'm gonna give you the quick version. That it's
Bro,
basically like,
it's just that everyone who's ever seen sort of a Middle Ages like a hero's journey story. It's kind of the same thing where, you know, the main character is wronged as a kid and he comes back for vengeance. It's if you've ever seen Gangs of New York, great movie as well. It's the same kind of plot line.
yeah, it's an archetypical plot. Like, father
Yeah.
is killed like unjustly in the kid's eyes, even though there was more.
Have you ever seen Gangs of New York?
I've seen it once, way back.
Yeah.
This came out like mid
2002.
Yeah, it was like I was thinking I said 04, but
it was a good movie with Liam Neeson.
I might need to rewatch it because it's been a refresher. But unfortunately, I have other picks. I have a Mexican film in the back pocket coming eventually.
Okay.
But
¿Y tu mamá también?
no, this is the one that it's different. You'll see one day. But so what was I saying? Oh yeah, and so, you know, like you said, father gets killed, son wants vengeance. His vengeance isn't as straightforward as he thought it would be. In the end, he wonders if it's really worth it. Makes a certain choice that we'll debate whether if it was a cope or it was like a cool little twist. And he ends his journey, right? I mean, he does perish in the end. But to your point, it's a very simplistic plot, and it's really, I feel like the power of this film is more of the style and the themes, but not like.
What came to mind story was this is The Lion King.
Except Simba has sequels. There's not going to be a sequel to this one. I can promise you that. Which is actually good.
That's not true. It might follow the lineage.
Okay, then this Hollywood's milking this too much. Then. Yeah, that's the thing too. I like the theme of lineage too. That was
Chris. Hollywood would never milk anything.
They milk a lot.
Everything.
I like the lineage aspect too. I think we don't often think about that. I've been meeting more they call themselves child-free couples in New York, and it's really fascinating, the conversation. Because you see, are you looking up the term?
No. It's reminding me of something. Go ahead.
And it just reminded me of how, like, maybe things have changed in our society. I know we've talked about this often off camera, but like, and look, these are like fantastic people. Actually, I work with one, and honestly, what he told me made sense. It was against like my DNA, but honestly, everybody has their own choices and they have to do what they think is best. But basically, they decided to be child free because they were more analytical about it. They crunched the numbers about having a kid, and it was just like, if we want to make our goal. Honestly, I give them credit. Sorry, just take a step back. I give them credit because most people try to make choices. I know you're frustrated by people like this. that they don't realize that maybe there's a contradiction.
I'm frustrated.
Yeah, I mean, you get frustrated with people that like they say they want this, and then you're like, well, you have to sacrifice this, but they want it both. They want it all, kind of thing. Like they want like the faithful wife, but they want to have like party lifestyle. Like they're not coherent.
Well, that's just not. It's just not reality. You live in a delusion of fantasy.
Look at that little trigger there. But anyways, there's a lot of people live in delusion. But anyways, so they actually crunched the numbers saying like if we wanted to retire by 50 or have a kid, we couldn't do both. And so we had to have the tough conversation and decide which one was more important. And they were like, we're going to retire at 50. And I was like, okay, at least you're not giving me this spiel like, oh, we want to retire at 50 and we want to have a kid and we're going to make it work somehow. Well, I don't know how, but
win a lotto.
Like you said, not living reality, right?
Oh my god, yeah. There's so many people that play the lotto when it gets to like so big. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, you're never gonna win that. You're just dumping money.
But my whole point is that like he did touch upon how like the one thing he thought it was tough. The conversation is that like it was a sacrifice because he said I had to give up like having a relationship with a kid and doing things with that kid. And basically he was describing it without saying the word legacy. He was just saying like, I won't have the opportunity to like, bond with the child over, it's actually a Packers fan, ironically, the Packers or like things that he grew up with his parents, like his dad and doing stuff.
I heard of a bit.
Yeah, he said that's why he said it was a sacrifice. I like the terms he used too. It wasn't like, oh yeah, we're child free because kids are dumb. No, it was like it seemed like they had a genuine conversation. This couple met in college. Couple met in college. They got married like in their mid-20s, but they've been like together like 10 years. But now they're like a few years older than us. And like it was like a more recent conversation in the last like 3 or 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, he said it was tough, but like they decided on this and they're sticking with it. But there was a conversation. It just wasn't like we hate kids. It was a genuinely like we have certain goals that we had when we were 20. Do we still want those goals? And they do, and it unfortunately doesn't involve a child. I've also seen it. I also seen it switch. I met a guy that my old coworker. He never wanted children.
I find it fascinating. Why do they want to retire so young at 50?
Because they're big. Like
do they want to travel or like what do they want?
They're big. What's his hobby? Him and his wife love to scuba dive. They want to scuba dive. I wouldn't say it's travel because it's like they're gonna go places, but like they like scuba diving everywhere. They want to do that like full time basically as like without worrying about work and stuff. So
interesting.
And like have like a nice hobby. But yeah, they every trip they do, they always scuba dive. He's done it in Iceland.
But I guess my question is what happens if they get bored or they stop liking scuba diving?
I mean, I don't ask those tough questions to ask on my personal podcast.
That's a hard one though, right? Because then you're like, what happens you get to 50? It's like, well, we scuba dive everywhere. It's like that doesn't really bring us quite the satisfaction that it once did.
So I have another interesting story.
Sorry, we're going way off topic with this.
I know. Well, it's because that's why I like this film. Although it's like more thematic.
Okay.
Because it's going back to Lineage and Destiny that our main character faces. I have another person I know that when I met him, he said, "Oh, I'm not having kids."
Mm-hmm.
And then what ended up happening is I think his wife had a change of heart. Kind of late, but still within the, mid-30s, could still happen. It reminds me of actually, I don't know why I didn't bring this up. We did How to Be Single. Anyways, but it takes this movie to get the best out of me. Anyways, and he said like they've been having a hard time, but he just actually announced recently that they're gonna have a child this year. But he said like he was so set on like, nah, my window's passed, it's over.
Did he want kids or he didn't want kids?
He was indifferent to it because he had a tough upbringing. So he was just like, I think I could do better. I think I could do better than my parents, but also if I don't have to be in that challenge, I'm not going to be too, what did he say? Like too bothered by it. But it was his wife that had the change of heart. He really cares for her. So he was like, okay, like I will try it. But he had a rough upbringing. I don't think he gets along with some of his relatives, but not all of them. But it goes back to like, but from what I gather, she had the change of heart because on that conversation about the other person, like she had the opposite clicked in her brain. Or like she wanted to be a mom and she wanted some kind of child parent relationship, even though she thought she didn't, Again, it reminds me of the movie we reviewed a few weeks ago. And when I think about those kind of stories, when I saw this film, I was like, going back to what you said about like archetypes and the books you reference, like even though people make choices and there's some new phenomenon in our society, I think to your point, like it's hard to break, let's say like that, like those thousands of years of like just the human, like you said, what it came, let's go with your take. It came out of us naturally. But what I see now is people are trying to break that. And I think the reason they're frustrated is that they think you can just flip the switch and you really can't. And
No, it's like people think that they can that hormones don't do anything, that they could just sort of overcome your natural biology. It's like, well, it's hard to, because we are hardwired to a degree on certain things.
Exactly. Yeah. And you see this in the main character Amleth, that he once he starts realizing that he's going to be with the legacy, even his mindset changes, right? So quick recap is that he gets with Olga, which was so predictable. I mean, this is like I said, nothing that we didn't see coming. That was pretty steamy sex in the scene, and then I guess she's pregnant immediately.
When they have twins, and then he could see, because it's prophecy, and he just touches her stomach and can telepathically. There's just a lot of
mythicism.
Yeah, it's so much mythicism in this movie, but I mean, that's par for the course.
Don't worry. There's tons of mythicism in Mexico too, so don't worry.
They're in a lot of old cultures.
But yeah, so it goes back to one of the themes of this film, is that he's told he has to make a choice, right? Like
the Mexican mysticism is that Vapo Rub cures everything.
I mean, I was as a child, I had a lot of Vicks rubbed on me on the back, on the chest. Honestly, I don't know if it cures anything, but I always like the burning sensation I got. Yeah, I did like that. That was cool. But I look back, I'm like, I don't think that did anything. Sorry. I was like, I don't think that did anything. But it made me feel better for those a little bit. But he has to make a choice between, and I think that's another theme of this film that I think is underrated, is like we often have to make choices, even though we don't think we do, but we do. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the choice is not to make a choice. People forget that. And he's always been, throughout the film, he's told he's gonna have this conundrum: either vengeance or forgiveness for his kin or whatever. And again, it goes back to interpretation, which is maybe the power of like our minds and our brains. He interprets that as, well, he does a little thing where like, I choose both, because he ends up going to fight his uncle because he's afraid that his uncle is going to like always seek to kill his children as revenge. The cycle won't break. And so he goes to end the cycle, hoping that he can kill him. And he knows that he is destined to die. He's told he's destined to die on that island. So he knows he's kind of going to die there too. And his lover Olga knows that as well. That's why she screams in agony. And I was curious, like your take on that thread throughout the film, and like the character's interpretation of his own prophecy and how he acted.
Well, can you repeat that? I think I missed something.
The question, or like
the question.
Oh, I was just curious about like what did you think of that kind of like that storyline throughout the film, the character's interpretation of his supposed prophecy and the action he took, like basically that kind of chunk of that's an important part of the film.
You talk about Amleth like going and realizing once he had the twins, or I think I missed something in your lead up.
So basically, the backdrop, right, is like he goes back to fight his uncle, right? Because he wants to, because he wants to.
Oh, because he knew that they'll never be safe. Yeah,
exactly. And he says, "I choose both." He says, "Like I was told I was going to have to choose between two things, and I choose both." First, that's already loaded, right? Like his interpretation of what he's been told. I'm curious what your take on that is, and then as a whole, the theme of like those things of like the theme in the film, the dichotomy of like you have to have a choice. So even though there's destiny, like to your point, there is still like he has to make a choice, right? That whole contradiction.
He realizes like his kids will never be safe, right? And so he went back to finish the deed so that it was no longer about himself, right? I guess I'm curious, what do you mean by he wanted to choose both?
Well, he says I want to choose both. I'm choosing both forgiveness for my kin, because he says I'm saving my family, and vengeance. I find that to be a cope, but only because it's an intelligent one.
I,
Because we're often the stories we tell ourselves.
mhm.
But I think, I think he wanted to have it both ways, but
Yeah,
really he chose like vengeance truly because he already gone that path.
but he could have chosen vengeance. It wasn't. He made that choice once he found out he was having kids, and I think at that point his instinct to protect his family is what overrode that as well.
Yeah, he chose vengeance, but what I think is a nuance of this film is that he chose it not out of he chose that path at the end, not out of because of his pure hatred and the bitterness and all the Raven stuff, but for the hope for the next cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was very,
Convenient.
not convenient. What's the term? Like very a good way for that film to kind of end. But I do think that the director was more superficial about it. It was just like, oh, I'm gonna have the character be like a cool twist. He's gonna choose both. I'm like, that's just come on, dude. That's that's such poor writing, dude. You gotta have a little more to it, dude.
Oh, you're mad. Well, yeah. I mean, I don't really have an opinion either way on that part. I did like the final fight scene though when they're in the volcano. I'll meet you at the gates of hell.
That's a good one. I also like the one in the where he has to get the sword. That was pretty cool too.
That was cool. I really like the. I think it was a backdrop of lava. I was like, oh, this is dark. You literally feel like you're at the gates of hell.
And then he gets into Valhalla.
Yeah,
the fight scenes were awesome in this film. I will say
they're pretty good.
I like how they did certain angles where it was it reminded me a martial arts movies of the 90s except with weapons, like with sword fighting. Like they zoom in, it's really tight close. You see the action, he gets cut, bleeding everywhere. Oh yeah, there's a lot of gore in this film. Like when he's remember when he's captured and he's beaten up? It's crazy.
Oh yeah. And then Odinson as ravens.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the Ravens save him. Yeah, they free him. No, it was a very interesting film stylistically. Also, there's some scenes where I'm like, this is so over the top. Or remember he's at the top of the hill and he's just yelling down, "I am Hamlet, son of," Oh, yeah. And he just starts fighting people randomly. I'm like, yo, dude, you need some more strategy here, dude. He goes from he goes from being stealthy, like, oh, I'm gonna kill people secretly,
strategic.
And then he goes to top of the hill. I'm like, okay, dude, that's a big 180. I guess it was to save that Olga, but I was still come on, dude, this gotta be a better way, dude. I like how he cut the guy in the nose and he slowly stabbed him to death. That was
by the way, I also like how they go and do the burial and no one's watching him at the place where the house where they tortured and the Ravens pull him down and he just escapes. I was like, yeah. Right, because that's so believable that they wouldn't have someone guard someone who's been terrorizing their village.
Yeah, there was a lot of mythology leaps here that happened. I was like, this is just so that the story can move on and get to the final crescendo of that fight. But no, the volcano scene was pretty cool. Also, where the he has to walk by his mother up the steps.
Mm-hmm.
Because the guy is, I guess the uncle truly loved his mother. And that scene, we won't have to go too much detail because it was very creepy. It was the one scene that made me go ugh, but it was It was so important for the character arc,
right?
And then he kills the whole line is gone. Honestly, the film made me really want that family to. Oh, okay. But before we get to final thoughts and ratings, what did you think of that crazy game they were playing where the kid almost dies, where they have to get that ball across and then they beat the crap out of each other?
Mm-hmm.
It was funny is that I thought that was totally over the top, but then we get sent a video about a similar sport that happens in Italy, dude. That's crazy. I didn't check.
I didn't watch it. No.
You gotta watch 2 minutes of it because that sport reminded me of the sport they were playing in the thing. It's crazy.
Oh yeah. No, I know what you're talking about because I think I've seen it before, where it's incredibly brutal in Italy.
Yeah,
they just is it in Genoa? No, I forgot what part of Italy. Yeah, that's right. And then there's people who have to be carted off.
Yeah, but that Viking sport was similar. I was just like, oh my goodness, it's this kid's about to die, and then he doesn't. But that brat was so annoying, dude. I actually was like, maybe he can die. You know? I was like,
Well, even the older son was really annoying.
no, that guy was just entitled.
Mm-hmm.
He was like a guy that acted like he's the king of like a kingdom, and his kingdom is a farm.
Yeah, a couple sheep.
I was like, dude, you're just a farmer now. Like, relax, dude.
He's just bitter.
Yeah, he thought he was gonna be king of the world, and now he's just the king of.
And then the Norwegians kicked him off their land.
I know. I thought that was an interesting early twist. He's like, he didn't even keep that thing for long, huh? So
yeah.
they just came in and boom,
Uh-huh.
and then But anyways, I think we talked about this film a decent amount. Like I said, this is not an overly complex film. The style is kind of unique. I think a lot of the themes are kind of universal that I think people like to always bash on. But look, the reason Star Wars, maybe I don't know if I'll ever do that one, but the reason the verse Star Wars is really popular is that George Lucas admits that he basically read like the most common myths and melded them together in a space verse.
Mm-hmm.
And Disney's still milking that. So these things have they resonate with us, even if they're in movie or Hollywood form. But often you can get it from books and literature and stuff. You can read the Odyssey, if you want. But it's maybe we'll do Troy one day. But it's one of those things where like I always like, me, I'm a big Power of the Myth guy and mythology and the storytelling. I love empowering people by helping them craft their stories, as you know. So it's one of those guilty pleasures I have. I love,
Yeah,
feeding,
I guess
the beast that helped or guiding them.
Yeah, my biggest knock on this is like there was nothing super unique about this.
No.
I think at this point I've seen way too many hero's journey kind of type of stories or archetypes where it's like, okay, the biggest twist was that the mom was a creep. That was pretty much it in this film. I think
there's no.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll say you're right. I don't think there's any real major twist. Even I knew like the film was going to end with. I could presume the film was going to end with him dying. I think what was interesting was just the Norse mythology aspect.
It reminded me of like verbatim. I was like, this is just gangs of New York.
I like the Norse mythology aspect, and then as well as the some, like you said, cinematography.
The Destiny, the lineage, cinematography was great. The dark undertones were, they fit well in the film. I'll give you that.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't, people should want to visit Iceland, dude. It looks beautiful out there, dude.
Yeah. Well, cinematography should. I think it did justice. I think they had some really nice shots, especially of the mountains and the rugged terrain there.
I think it was also filmed partially in Ireland, but I've been to Ireland.
I'm sure.
Well, I think the farm scenes are in Ireland.
Are similar.
Yeah, we'll go that far.
I just wanted to trigger you on something.
It's all good. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I guess I'll go first. Like for me, this is just a solid. I will say this: if I had to pay for the film, maybe change my rating, but I think it's just a solid watch. I enjoyed this more than I thought I would. It didn't trigger me as much as our previous film, but this one was like this was the holiday movie we watched over the break. This was our Christmas Day movie. It was funny. So to me, it's a solid 7 out of 10. Like it's solid for what it is. Like I said, it doesn't push the envelope, but can I tell people like, oh, if you haven't seen it, you'll enjoy it? Yeah.
A lot of people who watch Marvel films, right? You sort of typical moviegoer will really enjoy this film. I think it's because it tells you, the title of As Old as Man is like, redemption, vengeance, the hero's journey. It has all those themes that a lot of people tend to like in their films, right? And it has a satisfying ending in a way. And it really goes into the whole idea of like prophecy, destiny, fate, things I think draw to a lot of people. I thought the cinematography was really beautiful in this movie. The acting was okay. I'm trying to think if it was not. It wasn't the most spectacular performances I've ever seen. I thought the main character did a good job in his role, but it wasn't anything. It wasn't like a terribly difficult role to, I think, pull off. And not compared to like last week with the whale. I know you hated that, but that was it was really good acting from the main character.
No,
especially
that movie
Summerall.
had better acting, 100%. This movie, there's barely any dialogue.
Right, and so
The acting here is
it's
like
okay.
making wolf noises, which is okay. That's a skill, I guess.
You know who did it better was Leonardo DiCaprio in
Yeah.
The Revenant. Yeah, overall, I thought it was a decent film. It was nothing too unique. I think that's my biggest knock on it. I thought the dark undertones, the directing style was good. There's nothing I would knock there, but I'd give it a solid 7.5 out of 10.
All right. I think that wraps it up. Please
Sounds
like
good.
and subscribe. Please like and subscribe. You know, we need all the subs we can get. We're trying to build a platform here.
Yeah, I mean, we tend to stick to the underground.